All right, it's time for our weekly feature. Tonight we're looking at the warming of the oceans, one of the effects of global warming, of course, measuring the magnitude and the rate at which the ocean temperatures are rising is a complex process, but according to a report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Earth today is about 1 degree centigrade hotter than pre-industrial levels, purely because of climate change, and that's enough to melt up to 44% of glaciers worldwide. Let's find out what's going on. We're joined by Ashley Johnson, the Director of Oceans Research at the Department of Environmental Affairs. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Johnson. How accurately are we predicting what is going on in the oceans right now?
First of all, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. I think the most important thing that people need to understand is that the Earth acts as a system. The atmosphere, the ocean, the land, and how it impacts people all work in one integrated way. So if you disturb one, you disturb all the others. Of course, what we also need to understand is that more than 71% of this Earth's surface is ocean. So it is one of the biggest driving forces in terms of controlling how the scenarios are going to play out in the future, in terms of how the ocean has the capacity to try and normalize what we see. So in terms of trying to understand what is happening in the ocean itself is a complex thing. Oceans are not like the land. They move. There are no boundaries. So to take the actual measurements in oceans, that is one of the biggest challenges we face for scientists all around the world, including for South Africa, and that makes the predictions and the projections so much more difficult.
So we know the oceans are warmer, but not by how much, basically?
Well, you see, what the IPCC does is it gives you a generalized view of things. Now, that's all okay, but that's a generalized, averaged view. When you hone down into the oceans that surround, for example, South Africa itself, you find a very different picture because it's not an average scenario. So what we have on our coastline, on the west, you have a very cold Benguela system. On the east coast, you have a much warmer Gullah system, which in fact has shown to be increasing in temperature and speeding up because of hotter waters in the equatorial areas of the Indian Ocean. So that itself, being where we are geographically, puts us in a very different position to anyone else in the world, because nowhere else you have these two systems coming together and creating some new microclimate for the region. So in order for us to understand, it requires really a very thorough program between government scientists, academics, and every other scientist that we can find to basically understand how these things change, because things in the ocean change on a very short scale, but in large, it changes over a very, very long time. So changes you see now will only really be seen as an effect in the ocean way, maybe even centuries down the line. That's the complexity that we're facing.
So you're following this. Is it academic for South Africa in a sense? When we think of global warming, we don't think of South African cities being submerged. We're not surrounded by ice that's melting. Or is there specific implications for our own country?
Well, I think that's the key. For example, we might think that we will not be affected, but like I said earlier, the ocean is one mass. It literally moves, and therefore these disturbances that we create as humans travel all around the world. So, for example, if we get to a point where Greenland, as an example, is completely melted away, or the entire ice sheet, you have a few meters of sea level rise. Now, what does that mean? It means places that are For example, in Cape Town, we have an area called the Cape Flats. It will be submerged. It will be below water. We're literally building on the lines that form a potential of being washed away, increased sea level. Also, with your combination of warmer temperatures in the ocean, means your storms are going to be bigger. It's going to be more frequent. So things that we expect to be seeing once every 10 or 20 years, we might be seeing every year, every second year. So the damage and the impact is very real for us, irrespective of where we are in the world. If you take the East Coast again, the warmer waters, what does that mean? It means that if it becomes any warmer, you have the chance of tropical storms hitting the north of KwaZulu-Natal's coastline, something we've never ever thought of before. So it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to be affected, whether you live on the coast or inland, because rainfall patterns will also be shifting. And as we can see from Cape Town in the drought scenario we are right now.
You say that this is an ongoing, confusing field. We're not sure exactly what's happening. Does that fuel the denialism around climate change?
I think denialism is a way of sticking your head in the sand and hoping for the best. I think there's far too much information that's saying to us climate change is real. It is happening, and we are tracking it. The concern that we have is that the measurements and the information that we require from oceans in order for us to be able to project very accurately as to what is going to happen, that is missing. Because you must understand, oceans are 4,000, 5,000 meters deep. Taking measurements at that depth is a huge challenge. And of course, it moves. It doesn't stand still. So this dynamic will only really be understood the more effort we put into measuring the science and getting the right information in order for us to be able to do the right projections for our own country.
You've outlined the complexity. I mean, just looking at some of the information, the oceans store heat, sometimes giving it up. Explain how the oceans, in a sense, shield us.
Well, you see, the role of oceans for as long as it's been around has been to restore the balance that happened, or the imbalances that happened within the atmosphere. For example, the Industrial Revolution saw us pumping a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The bulk of those greenhouse gases has been absorbed by the ocean in order for us to have a habitable planet. But what we're doing is we're continuously pumping this into the atmosphere. The ocean is absorbing at a rate at which it can only manage. It can't do it any faster, nor can it do more than what it is at the moment. So in fact, the oceans is shielding us to a large degree from what could have been a much more disastrous situation. So it takes up 90% of the excess heat that we pumped into the atmosphere. Now, that has an implication because the ocean is then warming. That ocean and heat is a form of energy. And that energy then, from time to time, is transferred from the ocean back into the atmosphere. Then you have massive storms. You've just seen what happened in the US, one tropical storm after the other. What we've seen in our winters that we've just had, there were a few very big storms coming through. So that is as a result of the ocean just not being able to hold on to all this excess energy, and it has to release it. And the only way to go is into the atmosphere, and the only thing in the atmosphere that's going to take it up are these storms.
So I cited a UN report saying up to 44% of glaciers could melt. I mean, is that possible? What sort of time frames are we talking about? And what sort of impact will that have on communities?
Well, I think what we're looking at here is at least over the next 100 years. What we're looking at is you have different kinds of glaciers. You have glaciers that are already in the ocean. And those will not affect sea level. The problem with land-based glaciers melting is that adds water to the ocean. That means sea level rise. What sea level rise means is that when you take this whole storm scenario that I've just explained to you, if the sea level is higher, the storms and the storm surge that comes with it can go much further inland than what is happening at the moment. And the people who are going to be the most affected is going to be the most vulnerable people in our society. And it's not just storm surges, but your rainfall patterns are going to change. You're going to have massive storms coming through, dumping of that water onto new areas that have not experienced this before, potentially. And people who live then in those floodplains, again, they're going to be the most vulnerable of society. They're the ones who are going to be most affected by it.
All right, even South African communities, thank you for that excellent explanation. That was Ashley Johnson, the Director of Oceans Research at the Department of Environmental